Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Carmen Wash Process Colombia from Bonanza Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Bonanza, based out of Berlin, Germany. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I've possibly tried once before in my life, as I do believe I visited one of their cafes out in Seoul back in 2019. But I'm not entirely sure. So for all intents and purposes, we'll say that this is my first time ever trying this coffee roaster, as we've had a number of requests to review some more German-based coffee roasters. So when I did see them at a local multi-roaster, it felt like a great opportunity to try out a German roaster that we've never featured on this channel before. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 35. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. I do believe that Bonanza Omni roasts all of their coffees, which is interesting given that our previous experiences with German-based coffee roasters have been on the lighter side of things. So relative to those coffee roasters, this one definitely felt a fair bit more developed. So I feel like the best way to describe this one is on the more developed side of a medium light relative to a lot of its other German contemporaries. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression, and we opted for the V60, and the cup came out pretty straightforward Colombian coffee, as it was slightly more developed than expected going into it, with a focus on some slightly more dark cacao-like chocolate aspects, as well as a fruit brightness and some darker sweetness in the finish. So overall, a decent start, if not quite what I was expecting going into it. Day 17, ran it through the Chemex, and the cup came out extremely nutty today, to the point where it was one of the most defined nutty profiles to a coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel, as it seemed to accentuate that quality in significant abundance while offering some more dark sweetness. So this one was an okay day, not necessarily my favorite. We continue on to day 20, as we ran it through the April brewer, and we had some pretty similar experiences, as there was a slightly more cacao-like aspect to the chocolate component, though there was a slightly bitter honey sweetness to the cup as well. A bit darker themed in general, as there was less nuttiness. So overall, the first 3 days haven't necessarily been the best. Some days have seemed to accentuate certain qualities, but up to this point, not necessarily my favorite. So we continue on to day 23. Ran it back through the V60 at some lower temperatures, and it felt a little better in general, as the cup felt slightly more tame, having allowed for a more clear focus with plenty of the fruit brightness at the forefront, and a slightly more robust South American characteristic of chocolate and nuts in the finish. Some slight stone fruits as well, and some delicate lemon too, so just a little bit more depth to this one, although at the same time it did come out a little bit more tame. So day 25, back through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and another okay day, as it seemed to accentuate some more of the development with a more smoky quality this time. A darker theme to the cup can be felt, with mostly chocolate and nut forward aspects on this day. So that's why it's kind of interesting that I said the Chemex was my preferred brew method. You'll get to that when we get to our final Chemex day. But day 28, things just kind of came full circle, as we returned to our starting point once again, as the coffees had pretty mixed results, with the more developed profile seemingly hindering the overall clarity to the cup. Darkness in more abundance, as the listed molasses felt very dominant, so this was just an okay day. This was another V60 day. And on day 30, I opted for the Chemex one more time with our standard recipe, and it's the best it's been by a distance, and that's why I settled on that particular brew method, as it's best right after it's been brewed, as it offers a slight bit more of a vibrant, dark profiled cup, with components ranging from some darker plums to some darker grapes, as well as the listed molasses. So to the finish, there is an unexpected brightness in line with the listed apple, and some tea-like savoriness too. So this one seems to offer the most depth I had experienced from this coffee. And on day 32, honestly just happy with the way we settled on this coffee, as there was a pretty defined dark profile, with more of the chocolate, darker fruits, listed molasses yet again, a slight bit more of that brightness, as it offers a nutty cool down and finish as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 2 level 4s. So let's go through those real quick, and we'll start with the finish. Level 4, Yes, I do think that that's one of the more interesting parts of this coffee, as I kind of mentioned that the finish itself does offer a very strong nutty profile to it. And that was maybe the most defined and continuous aspect, consistent aspect of this coffee as well. So level 4 does seem apt, even if it wasn't necessarily the strongest finish in general. Acidity, level 4, yes. And that's the other really interesting part about this coffee is for something that felt as developed as this one was, I wasn't necessarily expecting as much of a brightness to this as it turned out to have. So having that score at that level 4 is kind of interesting. Though at the same time, I would say it's on the slightly lower side of level 4. Nothing in this coffee was very strong in that sense, and you can kind of see that demonstrated from the rest of this tasting wheel. We'll start with the sweetness at the level 3s though. And yes, this one right here, as I kind of mentioned, a little bit more tame from start to finish. This is a little bit more in line with the expectations you might have for a South American coffee, as this one just seems to offer a lot of the more robust characteristics to it. Chocolate, nuts, even a slight bit of caramel to it, and a smoky aspect, which are all demonstrated in the tasting wheel itself. Hence why the saltiness is at that level 3 mark. That's going to be attributed to some of the more nutty qualities in this one. Berry fruit, I did mention briefly that there's a slight darker grape-like quality to it. Citrus, level 3, as I kind of mentioned, there's a slightly lemon quality to it. Stone fruit, level 3, very slight darker plum quality to it. Chocolate, level 3, yes, that's fully expected. That's one of the more dominant characteristics in this. Caramel, level 3, this is a little bit more in line with your typical expectations for maybe a darker caramel, though I do feel like lumping the molasses into this feels like a pretty good fit, as that was one of the other really notable themes in this one. Smokiness, level 3, yes, even with some of the adjustments to hopefully tone that down, it was quite prominent and pronounced in this one, enough to the point where it scored pretty high relative to this tasting wheel. I mean, nothing in this tasting wheel is overly high, so when the smokiness seems to be in equal abundance to the majority of the other components in it, that's not necessarily ideal. Savoriness, level 3, that's a number of things, tea-like aspect, as well as the more nutty quality to this one. But yeah, that's again going to be one of the stronger profiles within this coffee. And then there are two things really worth discussing, and we're going to start with the cleanliness, level 3. Yes, this is a washed Colombian coffee, so in theory it should score that level 4. But the smokiness really did seem to take away from it, and that's typically where I take the point off for washed coffees, is if they don't necessarily have an overly clear profile to them. And that's going to be a lot of the time when we do have some more developed coffees, as I do feel that that takes away from it. So yes, that did score there at that level 3, which is a little surprising going into this one. And then the last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2. That's interesting to me. We do have one more Bonanza coffee that we're going to be reviewing, and I made both of the tasting wheels side by side, and I was really surprised that that coffee actually had a little bit more body. This could possibly be attributed to the Chemex being our primary brew method for this one, but interestingly enough, it does still score at that level 2 mark. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it's pretty safe to say that this is not necessarily my type of coffee. It was a little bit more developed than I was hoping for. So for that reason, I didn't necessarily love this one. It seemed to skew a little bit more in the direction of the profiles and characteristics that I don't typically enjoy. That, of course, being those more smoky qualities. But even then, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of nuttiness in coffee, nor really chocolate components. And as I always say, we start the conversation for me enjoying a coffee by having the sweetness at a level 4. That also that we didn't have the clarity, the cleanliness at level 4, while not necessarily offering anything in terms of a very strong fruit or floral profile. So this one was lacking in the 4 major attributes that I seek the most in coffees. So for that reason, it's not really surprising that it's not necessarily my favorite. But the type of person I would suggest this coffee to is anybody that might like a little bit more of a traditional profile, as this one is a little bit more of an everyday coffee drinking sort of coffee, as it does have those more traditional characteristics while still offering at least some additional components to it. As I kind of mentioned, the nutty profile at times can be very pronounced, so people that might like those really nutty qualities to their coffees. In addition to that, some slight fruit depth, as it wasn't necessarily one-dimensional. You were able to get them in all 3 of those fruit categories, while at the same time still offering some more of those chocolate-like components, while not necessarily having a very strong profile in one direction or another. It did have really nice balance in that sense, even if it was a little bit more on the tame side of things. But I think for the most part, this is the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Carmen Wash Process Colombia from Bonanza Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.